You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the associate editor at the Financial Times, Stephen Bush, and economics editor at the Spectator, Kate Andrews. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Stop the deaths, writes the Metro about the deaths of 5 people trying to cross the Channel from France. The Eye reports that the UK has been granting asylum to people from Rwanda, despite the government's assurances about the country's safety. While the Times headline reads, top Tories urge Sunak to toughen Rwanda bill. The Telegraph goes with polling, which suggests the Conservatives could be facing a 1997-style election wipeout. The Financial Times has developments in the post office scandal, reporting the government tried to block Fujitsu from new public IT contracts in the early 2010s. Meanwhile, the Mirror runs with calls by former sub-postmasters to see those behind the scandal punished in the courts. Their headline, "We can't let them off the hook." A warning from pharmacists over an unprecedented NHS medicines shortage. That's the front of The Guardian. The Daily Mail's front page has the headline, Queen's fury over naming of baby Lilibet, daughter of Harry and Meghan. The Daily Star suggests travel agents are preparing for an influx of bookings as people make plans to escape the impending cold weather. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Stephen Bush and Kate Andrews. Good to see you both. Thank you for coming in. Let's start with the Metro and this extremely depressing story. This is the 5 deaths of people trying to make that channel crossing, the first of this new year. Kate.
Yes, extremely sad. So it was a group of 71 people who were trying to make this crossing, and 5 people have sadly died. People have been counting how many days we've gone without an attempted boat crossing, and it had been some time. There was a 27-day gap. It was the longest in 5 years, but of course, when one was attempted, the first one of the year, we have seen some awful, awful losses. You know, a terrible reminder that the immigration system is not fit for purpose, that for these people who are trying to come over, for almost all of them, there'll be no other pathway to do so. It is an absolute tragedy, and one that the government claims it wants to stop. But if you look at the polls, people don't think that the Tory party or the Labour Party has any real solution to this problem.
And our correspondent in France reporting on this a little earlier was saying that it used to be that the cold weather was an absolute deterrent, but as temperatures plummet, people are still attempting the crossing.
Well, it's partly that one of the reasons why the number of crossings fell late last year isn't the weather had been quite bad for some time. And obviously, although most of the people involved in the boats are, you know, obviously they're in the underground economy, they've got to make money like everyone else. So at some point, the risk of crossing versus the fact that, you know, this is a serious industry, you know, means that you do see crossings even in very difficult conditions. I think I slightly disagree with you, Kate, though, in that ultimately every country has a measure of illegal or legal migration in or out of it. Before it was boats in this country, it was people coming under lorries. And, of course, people did tragically occasionally die making that journey too. So I don't think it's reasonable to... it's obviously a deeply awful thing that's happened, but this isn't really something any government can stop. Historically, you either have people dying trying to get into your country or out of your country. The mistake has been making this false promise based on the idea that it's something that you can get to zero.
Very quickly on that, I agree with you, Stephen. I think the idea that you could get this to zero is for the birds. It seems near impossible, especially if you don't think you would have the right to come to the UK, say, as an economic migrant.
So you're both saying that this is impossible to stop?
Well, what I would say, I suppose when I said that, what I meant was that there are only a handful of countries right now that you can apply from, or in a different country, to come to the UK. If you are Ukrainian, if you are Afghan, you have legal pathways as a refugee to come to the UK. That is not true for most people in most countries. In order to claim asylum, you have to get to to the UK. So I suppose that was the point I was making, that I agree with you, Stephen. I think the idea that boats will ever get to zero is nonsense. Tragically, I think it's just not going to happen. But you could potentially get that number a lot lower if you had more legal pathways.
So, Stephen, what does the government do then? If you're saying that this isn't something that you can stop, how are they supposed to fight it?
Well, I mean, I think what people want, right, is the reassurance that people will either be returned or processed, or then there's a sign that the government has an overall grip of the consequences here in the United Kingdom. I think it's actually probably a much bigger problem politically that you have parts of the country where you have, a hotel which a couple of years ago would have closed down. It's maybe a not very nice part of town. It badly needs renovation. But instead of it being taken over and spruced up a bit, effectively that's become an outsourced arm of migrant processing. So I think then the big thing that I would be doing if I were either of the parties is trying to talk a bit more about what you can control, which is what you do once people get here, rather than wandering around the country with a podium saying stop the boats.
Let's move to the Telegraph, because Rwanda is to be discussed this week in Westminster, and they're looking at the Deputy Chairman backing the Rwanda rebels.
So before Christmas, you had a situation where you had a lot of potential rebels within the Tory party giving big, long speeches about how they were completely opposed to the Rwanda legislation that Rishi Sunak is trying to push through Parliament. And the reason they're opposed to it is they think that they want more amendments because they think there are too many opportunities for illegal migrants to essentially stop these flights, to try to appeal, to try to slow the process down. Nobody actually voted against it in the end, but this is a big week because the main vote is on Wednesday. And the rebels are once again going to try to get some of these harsher amendments through. Here you have Lee Anderson, the deputy chair of the Tory party, suggesting that he might side with the rebels. Now, Rishi Sunak can have about 30 MPs vote against his bill in his party. He can have about 55 abstain and still get this through. But the number of voices saying that they might go to the rebel side is growing louder. Before Christmas, this didn't really pan out. The calls and the claims that people were going to vote against didn't pan out. Could it pan out this time? That's the big question for the government this week.
Stephen, what do you think we're going to see?
I think just as we saw before the Christmas break, when a lot of Conservative rebels have rather grown to like the sound of their own voices, but what they also like is continuing to be Conservative MPs. And the government will do...
Which one do they like
And
more?
the government will do exactly what it did before the Christmas break, which is go, guys, if you vote against this, we're having an election in circumstances that I don't think anyone thinks and the Conservatives would be able to win if their opening salvo in their election campaign was, we can't agree among ourselves with a majority of 80, re-elect us. And so, yeah, I think there'll be a lot of kind of people going, oh, it was hard for me to do it, but they'll eventually walk through the division lobbies, just as they did over Maastricht in 1993, just as Labour held together over 90 days detention in the last days of New Labour. This, I think, is basically what happens when a government is getting a bit tired and fractious, is that MPs, many of whom in this case have never held ministerial office, but they haven't known the cold, indifferent world of opposition, enjoying making trouble for themselves. And I think in a couple of months' time, they will look back and feel very silly for having done so. But
let's stay with Rwanda, and quite interesting revelations made by the Eye that 6 people from Rwanda have been granted asylum in Britain since the government signed the deportation agreement with the country in 2022. And this is despite this government saying that Rwanda is safe.
Yes, it's a really remarkable story, but one that should actually not surprise us terribly. I was looking for more details online, and whilst I don't think the article goes into specifically why they've been granted asylum, a lot of it has to do with Rwanda's political system and the fact that it does not necessarily share all of the democratic and human rights values that we value here in the UK. And a lot of people have raised concerns about not just Rwanda and their public policy as a whole, but specifically how they have treated refugees in the past, and the fact that we have seen some refoulement in the past. People like to shout down these warnings, but the fact that the UK government itself has granted asylum surely should make everybody pause and think to themselves when we talk about what a safe country is. Simply putting those words more firmly into legislation does not necessarily make it true. It might make it legal in the technical sense, but it's not necessarily going to make it true.
Does this smack of hypocrisy, Steve?
Well, this, I think, smacks of the silliness of the Rwanda scheme, right, which has always been based on this argument that Rwanda is, on the one hand, sufficiently scary than people who are willing to risk their lives to come to this country will go, oh, well, I was fine with drowning in horrible circumstances, but going to Rwanda, that's too awful. But at the same time, Rwanda was safe. Well, it can't be both, right? It either has to be really scary or it has to be safe. And essentially, what stories like this reveal, which we'll have many more, and we've had many in the past, is essentially the government is kind of trying to have it both ways. You know, as the Foreign Office, it says to British citizens, oh, here's things you should say about Rwanda. When it's dealing with refugees and asylum seekers, it goes, oh, yes, of course you have a claim. And then when we're talking about people coming via the boats, apparently Rwanda's safe. Well, I mean, it's a nonsense, isn't it?
OK, Stephen and Kay, thank you for your views thus far. We're going to take a break. Coming up, more from the front pages, including this in The Guardian. Their headline, NHS drug shortage poses threat to patients' lives. Do stay with us for much more. You're watching the press preview. Still with me, Stephen Bush, Associate Editor at the Financial Times, and Kate Andrews, Economics Editor at the Spectator. And let's start this section off by having a look at the front of the FT, the Financial Times, and this story about what has been revealed to be named Project Sushi. Kate, tell us what this is about.
This is a great scoop from the Financial Times, discovering that back in 2010 to 2015, during the coalition government, the government was trying to block Fujitsu, which is responsible for the faulty software around the post office scandal, from getting other government contracts because it was repeatedly failing and its software was repeatedly glitching in terms of other government contracts. This is Stephen's paper. I'll let him go into the details, but the bit that really surprised me is that the push was ultimately unsuccessful after government lawyers advised it would not be legally possible to discriminate against a company based on its past performance. I mean, how do we issue out contracts if we're not looking at past performance?
Yeah, it's a big problem which raises a couple of questions. One, as Kate says, that you can have a situation in which you're not allowed to consider past performance, but it secondly builds on some of our other reporting which shows that Fujitsu continued to receive about $4 billion worth of government contracts after 2019. So after they had been defeated in a court case in which a judge likened the post office's behaviour in this scandal to believing that the earth was flat. And so I think, you know...
And also after Fujitsu was suing.
After Fujitsu was suing. I mean, yeah, so it's ridiculous. You'd think that you'd be able to both consider past performance, but also whether or not someone is suing you with one hand and taking your business with the other. So actually suing you with your own money, in a sense. But, I mean, I think, you know... The handling of the post office scandal, none of our three major parties in England come out of it well. Labour, of course, were in office when the Horizon scheme was introduced. Coalition, Liberal Democrat ministers were the post office ministers during the final years of the scandal. And, of course, the Conservatives have the fact that they kept coming back for more business afterwards. But I suspect that, as is often the case with scandals in which no parties emerge well, it will be the party when the music stopped. In this case, the Conservatives, who I think will probably have the most difficult time of it.
And we read that the company this week, former executives, will be brought in front of the public inquiry. So we will get to hear from them this week, it seems, on that story. Let's have a look at The Guardian next. NHS drug shortage poses threat to patients' lives. This sounds incredibly serious, according to pharmacists. Okay.
Yes, it certainly is. It's around 100 drugs that were on the shortages list on the 30th of October, 111, down to 96 by the 18th of December. But that is still, a worryingly high number. A treatment for controlling epileptic seizures has just been added. As always, there are going to be a lot of culprits around this. The Guardian mentions Brexit and what's happened to the pound since. It would be ridiculous to say that Brexit has had no impact on trade or getting all kinds of goods, including medicines, into the country. Of course it has, but I think there's something much larger at play here. If you actually break down the details of the article, it also talks about the government's policy of taxing manufacturers. That's something that we control in Whitehall. But most importantly, NHS spending in real terms is up significantly. I mean, it is the highest it's been in real terms since the government came in 2010. We have a situation where more money than ever is going into the NHS, and yet productivity is still an extreme problem. You have to wonder if every pound is being spent efficiently. Dealing with these shortages is not something only the UK is dealing with, but I think there are so many issues facing the NHS right now. Brexit may be one of them. I don't think it's anywhere near the top of the list.
OK, just because of time, I'm going to move on, Stephen, to the Telegraph again, and then this political story that I know you're both keen to talk about, and the Tories potentially facing a 1997-style wipeout. Is that a surprise, Stephen?
Well, I'm afraid I rather sarcastically off-air asked if this was a multi-agency investigation and had led to this front page. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious to everyone who looks at the results of the elections or goes out and speaks to swing voters that people are pretty angry with the Conservatives. Now, yes, this style of polling has been very successful in recent elections, but really all it does is tell us the same thing as the polls. Now, if I were in the Labour Party, the reason why I'd feel optimistic is I would look at the various crises facing the government and think they're unlikely to have improved much. But if I were the government, I would look at the fact that this poll does suggest that 1 in 10 people are going to vote reform, which is much better than they have done in any of the actual by-elections or local elections in the last year. And I would hope, if I were the Conservatives, then that might be the difference between this level of wipeout, which almost certainly precludes any quick return, and something, you know, slightly more manageable than they might walk off after 5 years of opposition.
Kate, do you agree that this doesn't particularly paint a 100% disaster for the Conservatives?
No poll can you lean on to say that there's a 100% guarantee of anything. But
well, we know that very well.
We know that too well, so certainly not. But as Stephen says, this seems to be in line with, I think, a narrative that doesn't just come from polling, but comes from all kinds of factors, suggesting that the Tories are in for a long uphill battle this year before the election.
We shall see. Thank you both, Kate and Stephen, for the moment.